If you're a guitar player, I'm sure you're probably very familiar with this guy. And if you're not, I don't even know what you're doing. If you're not familiar with this is a capo. Go to the music store, get one immediately. Seriously, turn the video off, get in your car or on your bike, and go to the music store, get a capo. But don't forget your mask and wash or sanitize your hands when you get home. Okay, back to the capo. So I think this here is possibly the most powerful and underrated tool we all have at our disposals, likely in our guitar cases or sitting on the head of a guitar somewhere. And I think that capos have gotten a bit of a bad rap with certain people. I actually remember an instance about 6 years ago. I was playing a festival gig, and after our sound check, one of the guitar players from the other bands came up to me and started tearing into me for using a capo on my electric guitar. He went off talking about how capos are just for acoustic guitar players or beginners and was questioning whether or not I could play bar chords. I honestly didn't even know what to say at the time. To me, this actually exemplifies the two most common misconceptions about the capo. 1, capos are for beginners, and 2, capos are only for acoustic guitar. These statements could not be less true. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to use the capo to create better, more full-sounding guitar parts, and we're going to disprove that grumpy old dude from 6 years ago. If you're new to this, let's start with a couple of quick tips for how to put the capo on the guitar properly. Tip number 1 is that you want to put the capo just behind the fret on the guitar. I find this really helpful because the capo is essentially just replicating the nut, and if I put the capo too far back on the fret, I can sometimes misjudge where the first fret is and play a chord completely wrong. Next, you want to make sure the capo is going on straight and not on an angle. And be sure that it's not stretching any strings when you're putting it on. You want to open the capo completely and get it on as straight as possible and then close it. Lastly, I would suggest that you tune after you put your capo on. This is going to change the names of the strings. However, if your guitar was in tune before, you should just be able to tune it to whatever the closest note on the tuner is, and that'll get you there. Like I mentioned earlier, when you place the capo on a guitar, it's essentially taking the place of the nut. For every fret you move the capo up, what's happening is you're raising the pitch of the note or chord you're playing by 1 semitone. The way a capo is most commonly used is when people want to transpose the pitch of a song up to match their voice. For instance, if you're trying to learn a song and it's in the key of G, but you find it's a little bit too low for your voice, you can just capo up the neck until you find a key that works for you. I think a lot of people just use a capo this way, or they'll just follow whatever Ultimate Guitar tells them to do without actually really thinking about what they're doing. So my goal here is to show you guys what's really happening so that you can take advantage of everything the capo has to offer. Another really common use for the capo is to get ourselves into more guitar-friendly keys. When I say guitar-friendly keys, I mean keys that have lots of open chords, like G, D, C, E, actually anything that comes from the acronym CAGED. The key of B flat, for instance, isn't super guitar friendly because it doesn't include a lot of open chords and you wind up having to play all kinds of bar chords. I don't think there's anything wrong with bar chords and I think they're a really useful tool. However, to me, on the guitar, I think open strings are one of the things that really sets it apart from other instruments, and I always try and make use of them whenever I can. By using some more of these open guitar-friendly keys, we have access to some really pretty sounds in the open chords and voice leading options that are specific to certain scale and chord shapes. The difference between playing open strings and fretted notes is that open strings can ring out as you're making chord changes, making them feel a little bit more connected. You can utilize them the same way playing a melody, creating a beautiful cascading sound. That being said, each of these open guitar-friendly keys has its own unique sound. That's because in each unique chord shape, the order of the chord tones changes. For instance, let's compare an open G chord to an open D chord. The first thing to point out is that in your open G chord, we're utilizing all 6 strings of the guitar. So compared to the D chord, where we're just using the top 4 strings, it's naturally going to have a thicker and fuller sound. Now, if we compare the order of chord tones from the lowest string to the highest string, you're going to see that they're different as well. For the G chord, we have G, B, D, G, D, G. That's 1, 3, 5, 1, 5, 1. When we look at the D chord, we wind up with a D, A, D, and F sharp. So that's 1, 5, 1, 3. Now, if we were to think about those two keys as a whole, G versus D, you can create certain sounds in the key of G that you can't in the key of D, and vice versa. Let's actually talk about how we can use a capo to take advantage of some of these sounds. If we can agree on the fact that each individual open key, C, A, G, E, and D, all have a unique sound, and we pair that with a little bit of fretboard knowledge, we can actually access these really unique sounds from specific open chord shapes in different keys by putting the capo in different places on the neck. So let's say that you wanted to play something that sounds like it's in the key of G, but by using D chord shapes. Here's what you need to know. When we think of our most basic open chords, a really good rule of thumb is that the root note falls on whatever the lowest string we strum is. If we think about a D chord, it's rooted on the 4th string because we only strum the 4 strings closest to the floor. And in this case, it's actually an open string. What we need to do then is we need to find a G note on the D string. If you don't know where the G note is on the D string, but you understand how tones and semitones work, you can just walk up a chromatic scale from D until you find G. For instance, D is open, D sharp is on the 1st fret, E, F, F sharp, and G. So we found our G root. What we need to do now is we need to put the capo on in order to be able to play that D shape by making this our open string. Because in the D chord, our root note was the D string and it was an open string, all we're gonna do is we're gonna put the capo on essentially to take the place of the nut. So wherever we found that root note, which was the 5th fret in this case, is where the capo is gonna go. So now when I have my capo on the 5th fret and I play a D shape, it's now gonna sound like a G chord. And if I wanted to go through and play a song in this key, all of the chords relative to D transfer to the key of G. Let's take a look at a different example and let's just reverse those two chords. So let's say I want to play something that sounds like it's in the key of D using G shapes. The first thing I need to do is I need to take my G chord and I need to determine where the root note is. The root note is on the 6th string because that's the lowest string that I strum. What I need to do then is I need to figure out where there's a D on the 6th string and place my capo accordingly. If you don't know where it is, you can do the long math, but again, I'm telling you, it's way better if you can put the time in and just know where it is. I know that the D note is at the 10th fret of the low E string, so what I need to do then is I need to put the capo somewhere in order to make that same shape. Like we mentioned earlier, the capo takes the place of the nut. So if I make my regular G chord, look at where the nut is in relation to where I'm fretting the 1st note or the root note of the G chord. It's 3 frets back. So what you need to do in this case, we said that the D note is at the 10th fret. So if I come up here and I just pretend I make a G shape here without actually putting a capo on, I just have to think, okay, capo needs to go 3 frets behind that note so I could count back from 10, 9, 8, 7. If I put my capo on 7 and I play that G shape, I wind up with something that sounds like a D chord. And just like before, that opens me up to some new sonic possibilities that wouldn't be accessible to me if I were just playing in open D. I find that when I explain this, sometimes people are confused about where to put the capo based on what shape they're playing. If you think about your 5 main major open chords, C, A, G, E, and D, 3 of them are rooted on an open string, so your D chord, which is rooted open on the 4th string, your A chord, which is rooted open 5th string, and your E chord, which is rooted open 6th string. So if you're moving up the neck and you're going to be playing using either an E, an A, or a D shape, once you find the note that you need, all you need to do is put the capo on whatever fret that was on. For instance, if I wanted to play in the key of A using an E shape, first I just need to figure out where the root note of the E is, which is open 6th string, and then I need to figure out where the A is, because that's the key I'm transposing to, 5th fret, low E string, And because it's an open string, so again, E, A, or D chords, all rooted on an open string, I'm just going to put the capo wherever I found that note. I found it here on the 5th fret, so if I put my capo on 5, and I play an E chord or an E shape, it becomes an A chord. It sounds just like an A. If I'm playing out of a G or a C shape, because they're both rooted on the 3rd fret, the capo just has to go back 3 frets from wherever you find the root note. For instance, let's say I wanted to play in the key of E using a C shape. So C is rooted on the 5th string, and I need to figure out where the E is on that string. Because E is at the 7th fret, if I were to make a C chord starting on the 7th fret, or the E note here, I just need to put my capo 3 frets behind that. So if I place the capo on fret 4, and I play a C shape, now it sounds like an E chord. Have you ever listened to one of your favorite recordings and felt like you could never really achieve the acoustic guitar sound, and it was just so wide and so full and so lush? That's because they likely cut those guitars in 2 different takes. One of them being open and one of them capoed to put you into that key using a different shape. This is one of my favorite techniques when I'm recording acoustic guitars. It's something I utilize all the time, and it's also something I try and do whenever I'm playing live supporting another artist. Depending on the song, if I can get myself capoed somewhere different, I know that I can create a much fuller sound. Now sometimes the song doesn't call for that, sometimes it just doesn't make sense based on the shapes available to you, or maybe you just don't want to have your capo that high, but a lot of the times this can be a really cool technique for creating a wider sound. Let's just use the key of G as an example because obviously I love it so much. So if I'm playing the main part without a capo, just standard open G, for me one of the best things I can do to complement that sound is capo 5 like we did earlier and play out of D shapes. For bonus points, you can even drop the low E string by a whole tone and you can put yourself into drop D, which just allows you access to some different voicings in the key of D. Let's check out this simple example first, where I'm just playing basic open chords and I'm strumming the exact same thing, one open G and the other one capo 5 D. Another way I like to utilize this technique is to actually play complementary or contrasting parts in each guitar. You don't have to play the exact same thing. The 2 different guitars can be bouncing ideas off of each other. You wind up with this back and forth, almost conversational-esque sound. Like I mentioned earlier, capos aren't just for acoustics. You can utilize the capo on the electric guitar in the same way we did on the acoustic. By combining capo use with different techniques and different effects on the electric guitar, you can create these larger-than-life orchestral guitar parts. So there you have it, a brief look at what I think is probably the most powerful and underrated tool all of us guitar players have at our disposal. I hope this video helped to open your minds to some new creative possibilities, and for all of you capo haters out there, I hope that you see this tool in a new light and maybe you could even see yourself using one day. As always guys, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate your time and attention, especially in such a noisy world.